Hello and welcome to the Catholic Challenge. I'm your host, Luke Lancaster, and today we're going to be going through why Catholic Bibles are bigger. If you notice, with a Catholic translation of the Bible, there are 7 extra books in there than other Bibles. For example, the Protestant Bible, non-Catholic Christians use a Bible that has 7 less books than Catholics do. Those 7 less books are known as 1st and 2nd Maccabees, Sirach, Wisdom, Baruch, Tobit, and Judith. Those 7 books in the Old Testament are only in Catholic and Orthodox Bibles. Now, why is that? Well, first you have to get a background of the Greek Empire. You have to get a background of Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great was a very skilled military leader. He conquered numerous places throughout the world. As you see in the picture there, you can see everything in the green there is what Alexander the Great conquered. He conquered most of the Middle East, and he dug all the way into India and Asia, and he went south in Africa and north above Greece. And he basically conquered everything. He Greekified everything. Everybody that he conquered, he made them have Greek culture. He made them speak Greek. The language that came out of that was Koine Greek, or Common Greek, Hellenized Greek. Right? Now, when Alexander the Great did this, since everybody started speaking Greek, right, the Jewish people aren't speaking Hebrew as much because now everybody's speaking Greek. It's a common language united throughout the entire empire of Alexander the Great. They translated the Hebrew Bible into Greek. This is known as the Septuagint. The Septuagint, translated around maybe 300 BC, or give or take some time there. Basically, when Alexander the Great conquered everybody, they decided to translate the Bible into Greek, and this became known as the Septuagint. The Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament, included those 7 extra books that Catholics use. And not only that, but everybody in the first century, Jesus and the apostles, St. Paul, all those big early figures in Christianity, they all spoke. They would have been probably learning some Greek, and they would have written, hopefully, maybe not, depends, but since everybody speaks a common language, very likely they might have written in Greek, spoken in Greek, but they all used the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament. Remember, that book used by Jesus, the apostles, and St. Paul, that has the 7 extra books that Catholics have and Protestant Christians do not. Consider this question. A renowned scholar named J.N.D. Kelly, he wrote a book called Early Christian Doctrines. He focused in on the early church and their usage of the Septuagint. He said, quote, "It should be observed that the Old Testament, thus admitted as authoritative in the church, was somewhat bulkier and more comprehensive than the Protestant Bible. It always included, though with varying degrees of recognition, the so-called Apocrypha or Deuterocanonical books, so 7 extra books. The reason for this is that the Old Testament, which passed in the first instance into the hands of Christians, was the Greek translation known as the Septuagint. This Greek translation is what basically most of the scriptural quotations are to in the New Testament. So the people there in the New Testament era, when they quote the Bible, they are quoting the Septuagint. You can find that on pages 53 to 54. Right, so J.N.D. Kelly is pointing out to us the fact that the Catholic Bible is actually the more ancient Bible. That is the Septuagint Bible. Right? So why is it nowadays that Protestant Christians deny those 7 books that Catholics have, like we already listed earlier, 1st and 2nd Maccabees, Tobit, Judith, etc.? Right? Why are they rejecting those? Well, they say that since those biblical books, those 7 books, were not originally written in Hebrew, they will say, well, those aren't authentic. But that actually isn't a very good argument, and we'll get into that. Not only that, but they will also claim that the New Testament doesn't quote to those 7 extra books that Catholics have. So why do they say that? Well, they think that there's no connections, but in reality there are. If you look at the 1611 King James Version Bible, right? That is the original Bible used by Protestant Christians in English. It actually lists 11 cross-references between the New Testament and the Old Testament. You can see Matthew 6, verse 7, connecting with Sirach 7:14. That's coming from the Septuagint, the books that Protestants reject. It's quoted by the New Testament. Or, for example, Matthew 27, verse 43. It's actually quoting back Wisdom chapter 2. Or Luke chapter 6 is quoting back Tobit chapter 4. And on and on and on. It lists 11 cross-references. So these 7 books that Catholics use, that Protestants don't, the New Testament actually refers to them or uses the same language as them to try and give you the imagery of the Old Testament, which they consider to be authentic, those 7 extra books. Now, not only that, not only does the 1611 King James Version list all of these cross-references, there's another major book. It's a major non-Catholic Greek New Testament that gives a gazillion different connections between these deuterocanonical books and the New Testament. If you check out the book known as Nestle Aland Greek New Testament, you can actually analyze numerous connections between those 7 books Catholics have and Protestants do not. Those 7 extra books being quoted by the New Testament, or making connections there. Right? Here's the first one that I want to point out. Tobit chapter 4, verses 8 and 9. This is a deuterocanonical book. Only Catholics have it. Look at what it says. It says, quote, "Give according to the little you have, so you will be laying up a good treasure for yourself against the day of necessity." Close quote. Another deuterocanonical book says around the same thing. Sirach chapter 29, verses 9 to 12. He says, quote, "Help a poor man. Lose your silver for the sake of a brother or a friend, and do not let it rust under a stone and be lost. Lay up your treasure according to the commandments of the Most High, and it will profit you more than gold. Store up almsgiving in your treasury." Close quote. All right, so Tobit and Sirach giving this idea of giving alms. These books rejected by Protestants, when it's giving this idea, Jesus draws from those ideas. Jesus draws from those 7 extra books. If you look at Matthew chapter 6, verse 2 and verse 20, Jesus refers to it. He says, quote, "Give alms, lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust consumes, and where thieves do not break in and steal." Close quote. Right? Jesus is using the same lingo as the deuterocanonical books, the books rejected by Protestants, but Catholics still use, because they are, in fact, canonical. They are books to be included in the Bible. Okay. Another one is James chapter 5, verse 3. This is in the New Testament. This also picks up on those 2 previous passages from Tobit and Sirach. It says, quote, "Your gold and silver have rusted, and their rust will be evidence against you, and will eat your flesh like fire. You have laid up treasure for the last days." Close quote. Right? Notice there, James is also drawing from Tobit and Sirach, Old Testament books used by Catholics only for some reason. Protestants need to use them too. There's another one here, Tobit chapter 4, verse 15. This one is going to be taken by Jesus. But first, read what Tobit says. It says, quote, "And what you hate, do not do to anyone." Close quote. And what you hate, do not do to anyone. This is basically stating negatively what Jesus states positively in the New Testament. Jesus says in Matthew chapter 7, verse 12, quote, "Whatever you wish that men would do to you, do so to them." Close quote. Right? Jesus is stating positively what a deuterocanonical book stated negatively. He's drawing from that book and rearranging it. Another one is Sirach chapter 27, verse 6. It says, quote, "The fruit discloses the cultivation of a tree." You'll notice that this idea of fruit and trees revealing works is exactly what Jesus says in Matthew chapter 7, verse 16. Jesus says, quote, "You will know them by their fruits." Close quote. Right? Jesus saying you will know other people, whether they're good or whether they're bad. You'll know whether they're authentic prophet or not based on their fruits, based on the actions that they do. And this is an idea drawing from Sirach. Another one, Sirach chapter 24, verse 19. Also, chapter 51, verse 23, and chapter 51, verse 26. Listen to this idea. Quote, "Come to me, you who desire me. Draw near to me, you who are untaught, and lodge in my school. Put your neck under the yoke, and let your souls receive instruction. It is to be found close by." Close quote. Notice this language, right? The yoke, teaching, coming. This is exactly what Jesus draws on in Matthew chapter 11, verses 28 to 30. He says, quote, "At that time Jesus declared, 'Come to me all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden light." Right, Jesus is actually drawing from a book that only Catholics have in the Bible. Let's look at another one. John chapter 10, verse 22. In the New Testament, one of the four Gospels, St. John says this, quote, "It was the feast of the dedication at Jerusalem," close quote. This feast of the dedication that John is referring to, he's referring to something that's only found in the deuterocanonical books, those 7 extra books that Catholics have. If you look at 1 Maccabees chapter 4, in the deuterocanonicals, it describes how the Greeks, right, whenever you had Alexander the Great, and how he Greekified everything, some people after Alexander the Great, they defiled the Jewish temple by putting a pagan statue there. So the Jews cleansed it and dedicated it again. They rededicated it, and that was then on remembered as the Feast of the Dedication. The Feast of the Dedication. That's where John's Gospel is drawing from. The Feast of the Dedication. That's found in the Deuterocanonicals. Let's look at another one. 1 Maccabees chapter 4, verse 59 says, quote, "Then Judas and his brothers and all the assembly of Israel determined that every year at that season the days of the dedication of the altar should be observed with gladness and with joy for 8 days, beginning with the 25th day of the month of Chislev." Right? Again, this idea of the New Testament drawing from only books Catholics have. Another one here, the book of Hebrews. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 35. This refers to an episode from Israel's history. It's actually referring to 2 Maccabees. Hebrews 11 says, quote, "Women received their dead by resurrection. Some were tortured, refusing to accept release, that they might rise again to a better life." Right? The New Testament, when it gives this idea, it's recalling an idea from the Septuagint, right? From the larger books, the Greek translation. This is what it says in 2 Maccabees chapter 7. Quote, "7 brothers and their mother were arrested and were being compelled by the king, under torture with whips and cords, to partake of unlawful swine's flesh." Right? The Jewish people were not allowed to eat pig. Right? So when the first son was tortured and was about to die by the Greeks were torturing him, it says, "The King of the universe will raise us up to an everlasting renewal of life." Right? These are the first son, right? Whenever the mother and the son who's believing in the resurrection, he's saying that we're going to be resurrected again by the King of the universe, by God. And then when he said this, the mother said, "The Creator of the world will in his mercy give life and breath back to you again," close quote. Right? From the Old Testament, they are saying that one day they will rise again, the resurrection of the dead. When you die, that's not the end. Rather, God will raise them up one more time. This is an idea that's found in 2 Maccabees and is recalled explicitly by the book of Hebrews chapter 11. St. Paul, he also does this. This is a very interesting one. It says in Wisdom chapter 5, verses 18 and 19, wisdom only found in the Catholic Bible, says, quote, "Put on righteousness as a breastplate, justice as a helmet. Take holiness as an invincible shield." Close quote. Wisdom 5, 18 through 19. St. Paul says the same thing in Ephesians 6. He says, quote, "Put on the breastplate of righteousness." Same language. "Take the helmet of salvation." Same language. "Above all, taking the shield of faith." Again, same language of a shield, holiness, faith, "which you will quench all of the flaming darts of the evil one." Right? With the shield of faith, you quench the darts getting thrown at you. Another one St. Paul draws on is Book of Wisdom, chapter 15, verse 7. This one giving the idea of a potter and the clay, a potter and the vessel. It says, quote, "For when a potter kneads the soft earth and laboriously molds each vessel for our service," right? A potter is molding vessels. "He fashions out of the same clay both the vessels that serve clean uses and those for contrary uses," right? Vessels, cups, bowls that are going to be used for good things and those who are going to be used for bad things. Things allowed by the Jewish law, things unallowed. And it says, "Making all in like manner, but which shall be the use of each of these, the worker in clay decides," right? So it's emphasizing that the worker, the guy who is making the clay bowl or clay pot or clay cup, it's determined by the one who fashions it whether or not that cup or that bowl is going to be utilized for a good or a bad purpose. This is exactly what St. Paul says in Romans chapter 9, verses 21 to 23. It says, quote, "Has the potter no right over the clay, to make out of the same lump one vessel for beauty and another for menial use? What if God has endured with much patience the vessels of wrath made for destruction, in order to make known the riches of his glory for the vessels of mercy, which he has prepared beforehand for glory," close quote. All right, what St. Paul is emphasizing is God is the potter. God is the one who is molding these vessels, these bowls, these cups out of the clay, and one will be used for wrath, and another one will be used for mercy, something for bad usage, something for good usage, unlawful and lawful. That's the same idea from the Old Testament book of wisdom. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and I'll see you in just a moment.